John, who are going to introduce themselves and what they're going to be talking through today.
Hi, so my name's Rosie Fraser, and I'm one of the vice chairs at London Historic Buildings Trust, but I also work as a heritage consultant. And in particular, I focus on project managing and also grant fundraising. So I tend to be quite closely involved in how the programme is going forward and how we're drawing down the funding to make sure we've got sufficient cash flow for the project to proceed. So that's kind of where I'm coming from when I'm looking at a programme. It's how I'm controlling a budget.
Hello, my name's John Bailey. I'm a director of Thomas Ford and Partners and a conservation-based architect. I apologise for my setting today. I'm actually in the basement of a church in Hastings, which we are working with at the present time. From my point of view, programming is absolutely vital in order to deliver a project, both from my side, which is usually controlling the design team and the other professionals, and for the client to ensure that we meet the milestones and we don't make a mess of it. And, you know, in worst case scenario, you can lose your grant aid if you do not meet those milestones. So programming is vital from my side. Right.
Yeah, so I mean, today what we're going to run through is purpose of having a program, and then we're going to just talk you through a case study that John and I have been working on together, which is why we thought it would be useful, because we both know it like the back of our hands. And this is a project on the Isle of Wight called Newport Minster. We're going to just talk through some of the phasing that's been involved with that project, which has been reasonably complex. A few top tips at the end. Hannah's going to talk about resources that you can use after the session, and then we'll do any questions. Do you want to? Thank you. So no doubt John will add any more in here, but the purpose of a programme, first off, is to identify key dates along your project timeline. And some of the key dates that you would look at would be identifying the RIBA design stages. And this is how architects set out all the different stages in designing a program, from concept design through to detailed design, securing planning permission, and then actually delivering the capital works and handing the building back. And that is in a series of stages from 0 to 7. So what we would do is we would pick up the RIBA design stages in a program, and then we would make sure that we have got all the various permissions that we need when we're working with that program, and all the various sign-offs that we need from the client, because this is critical. You've got to, when you're programming, allow time for the client to take the information that they've been given, to understand it, to challenge it, maybe amend it, and then come back and then sign it off. So programming is very important in terms of allowing sufficient time for all the key decision making in a project to be undertaken. And the other reason that programming is very important is because what it will do is it will set out the whole timeline for the project. So I think one of the key things to work to understand on a heritage project when you're starting right at the beginning is that sometimes they can take 5 or 6 years to deliver. And that does seem like a monumental task at the start of a project. But if you start to see it broken down into sort of bite-sized chunks, you can understand the steps that need to be taken along the way, and then hopefully it starts to look a little bit more manageable. Now, when we move to the construction side of the project, which is actually RIBA 5, a program is absolutely critical in keeping track of where the contractor is, and if the works, the capital works, are on program or running behind program. Because realistically, when you're doing capital works, you will have certain weekly costs that are attached to the budget. And if you start to overrun, even a week can start to have a cost impact. And if you start to overrun by, say, a month or 2 months, you can be talking tens of £1,000s of problems that are racking up. So it's hugely important that when you get to the construction stage of a project, that you are keeping track of a program on a weekly basis. And that's when you would go from an outline program, which is what we'll be showing you, to a more detailed program, which literally will have, just small chunks of time and days identified. It could be 1 day, 2 days could be identified in a program, or it could be a great big long amount of time. But it's really important when you get to the construction phase to have that detailed program. And then one of the other critical points of a program would be to track funder requirements. So a lot of projects are lottery funded. That would mean then that you've got to start to work to their grant application deadlines. So you've got to understand when you would be aiming to put in a grant application. They have 4 key deadlines a year, and they are March, June, August and November. So you need to be working right at the start to understand when you might be putting in a grant application. And the lottery is a 2-stage application process. So you would need to put in what's called a round 1 application, get a decision, permission to start, work through your development phase, and then put in a round 2 application. So all of that needs to be shown on a program. I think what's quite critical is that you would need to allow at least 2 months for permission to start, because it does generally take that amount of time. And it's important to realise that you've got to build that into your program. In a development phase, you've got to build in a mid-stage review, because the lottery can actually stop your project after a mid-stage review if they don't think you're progressing well enough. And then, as said, you've got to then identify the delivery phase, which isn't just construction, it's also about delivering all the activities as part of that project. So a program will help you kind of work your way through how long the project's going to take and all the critical activities that you need to do as part of it. Do you want to click on, Hannah? So this is the project that John and I were involved in. It is Newport Minster, as I said, on the Isle of Wight. It is a Grade 1 listed church, and that's primarily because of its links to Queen Victoria and the royal family, as opposed to the architect that designed it. The project has amounted to, it's roughly 2.4 million. It's been a two-phase repair project. So we've done external repairs to the historic fabric, which were undertaken earlier this year. And then next year, we're going to do the internal reordering, which will be putting in new loos, new kitchen, new meeting spaces, underfloor heating, and just making the building fit for purpose for being 21st century, and putting in sustainability measures to reduce the carbon emissions. So this has been a reasonably challenging project, because we, just before the construction was due to start, we lost a major donor, so we had to go back and secure additional funding. And we've had 1 or 2 challenging comments from trying to get the project through the faculty consent process, which is different to planning and listed building consent, because it is a functioning church through the Church of England. You want to move on to the next?
Yeah.
So I'm just showing some slides here. John, I don't know if you want to interject here at all and say what.
Yes, what I was going to say is that the project is designed in 2 phases specifically to make it easier for the parish, 1, to raise money, but 2, to keep going. So here is a historic building owner who has remained in the building while we do the first phase, which is the exterior repairs. And they constituted significant re-roofing, masonry repairs, window repairs, rainwater goods, and so on, all on a building that has no surrounding ground. So we had to get the permissions to put scaffolding up the tower and round the south side of the building on land that the parish do not own. So all the permission processes to get that in place had to be programmed in, which was a challenge, considering that quite a lot of the organisations you require permission from work on geological timescales at the best of times. And if you want to move something quickly, you have to build very good personal relationships with them. So the project was challenging on a whole number of scales, and we'll go through the planning, the programming issues in a minute. But if we move on, Hannah, just give you some idea of some of the work we were doing, replacing severely decayed masonry, but we couldn't go all the way. So we've only done some of the masonry that we have to do. The rest will be a further phase at some point in due course. The issue here, for instance, is that the masonry is in Carlstone from France. So you've got to build in the lead-in times to get that masonry from France in order for you to undertake the works and get the material right. But that's another whole question. Hannah? So what I want to do, you will not be able to see these programs at all in detail because they're too small, but they're there for you. You can blow them up. So what I was going to do is just tell you what it is we have in these programs. So this is an extract from the high level program. And as you see, it's a spreadsheet essentially. Oh, look at that. By magic, it's been brought up. So for instance, this is just a small section of the RIBA work stage 3. So we're working through detailed information, but this is the high level program, not the detailed program. And some of you may think we're slightly mad, but what this does is it gives us timescales. It gives us the number of days we have got to complete a task. And it goes through everything from the DAC, which is the Darton Advisory Committee permission process, or it might be planning if it's a secular building, through to consultation with English Heritage. It gives me, if you look on line 6, I have 66 days for the design team to complete all their information for RIBA stage 3. So Rosie will be beating me with a big stick because she's the project manager, saying, John, you have only got 66 days to complete this information. And she'll ask me on a regular basis, are we on programme? So what we're able to do is say, yes, my structural engineer, my mechanical electrical engineer, the principal designer, everybody is on programme. We also have a quantity surveyor. So you'll see he has, or they have, their own line, number 7, and they require 23 days in which to produce the detailed bills of quantities and the contract documents. They cannot start their work until they've been given sufficient information from the design team. So you will see that they start 3 months into the process. If I am late, then they are delayed. If they are delayed, construction is delayed. And this is the level of programming that we always work to so that we can ensure that we don't lose time. Now, there is slack in this program. For instance, I don't need actually 66 days to do the information. We can do it quicker, but it's better to be quicker than longer, because particularly with getting your permissions in place, working with the major funders, particularly the Heritage Lottery Fund, they have rigid dates that we have to stick to. So if we miss a quarterly meeting, you've got another 3 months to wait. It may be that 3 months means that you can't close the building on time, you can't reopen at the end of construction on time. So you need to have good warning that these things are in place. At Newport, what we did was we split the contract. So we have 2 parallel contracts, as it were. We have this overall programme, but then it's split into two phases. One is the external repairs, which meant we could spend money as required by some of the donors by certain times, but keep the parish operating in the building while we continued to try and work on the internal works, which have more challenging issues to agree with some of the national amenity societies. But it looks as if we are coming out of that little issue at the moment, and we're still more or less on programme to deliver on site for phase 2, which is the internal work, starting in 2023. And that's critical because Rosie has got on the other side delivering the activity plan. We've got all the community engagement. We've got lectures. We've had a whole series of visits. The archaeologist is now being procured and they're getting their information in place. There's so much relying essentially on the design team meeting the programme. If we don't meet the programme, then the project can be in serious trouble. I think that's fair, isn't it, Rosie?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So if we then move on, I think if we move on 2 slides, we've got an extract of the more detailed programme here. So this has got more about, this has got, for instance, on line 9, the National Heritage Lottery Fund submission date. That was a date that we could not miss. And then there it is. It's moving back and forward. Line 9. So there it is. It's that little bar under the 2nd of February week. We had to meet that date. Everything else before then has to be completed. If we don't complete it by that date, then the lottery application is delayed. And as you can see, we've got large chunks of time in against each of those activities. And we've got a whole series of regular meetings, design team meetings. They were monthly to ensure that we deliver. And then Rosie runs her project team meetings monthly as well, mixture of Zoom and on site, where I have to report to say that we are on programme. So all the way down through that, line 17 is the final permissions from the DAC, which we had to get in place. This is for the external repairs, and that was relatively smoothly, although they did insist on being on site to reevaluate the scope of works. And if you move down, then we've got the tender dates that we had to meet. We had to then confirm that we were within budget. Poor Rosie then had to make sure that the funding was in place, and Rosie worked extremely hard to make sure particularly one new funder could be found so we could actually deliver on site. And then one of those funders, we had to spend the money within about 4 months. So you have these challenging processes. So for instance, on the external repairs, we had a very fluid stage RIBA Stage 5 programme, which was developed by the main contractor, where we had to spend, oh gosh, £700,000, Rosie, was it in 4 months or 5 months?
Well, the total project cost was £804,000,
yes.
And we had to spend 80% by the 31st of March.
Bearing in mind, we couldn't get our permissions in place until the middle of December to start. And so again, in the programming, we actually split things out like the scaffolding so they could be procured separately so we could get those on site. The main contractor we worked with so we could procure the materials in advance. So we didn't have to wait 12 weeks for stone to turn up. Stone was there ready for us. We had major numbers of slates. So we did advance purchase of the slates direct from the manufacturer. So they were all sitting on a dock in Southampton, ready to come across the water to the Isle of Wight when we needed them. So there was planning going on months before we started on site in order to deliver a ridiculously tight programme to spend the money, because if you didn't spend the money, you lost it. And we managed to get there, and all we lost was about £200, wasn't it, Rosie?
Yep. £200
which was
down.
was a remarkable effort. And I have to say, picking the right contractor, because our contractor was outstanding and they worked with us, not against us, in order to spend the money. And so what we had was weekly programs against progress. Had we laid enough slates? Had we laid enough battens? Have we replaced enough masonry? And so on, so that we could then get the invoicing in place so that Rosie could draw down the grants so we didn't lose it. And this is the level of planning that we are going to be going through on the internal phase. The internal phase has got archaeology. So we're going to take the floor of the church up, and we know where the archaeology is because we've done test pits again in our earlier programs, so we don't have archaeological surprises. And so this is essentially to deliver phase 2 on site. Some of those decisions have been made 2 years ago in order not to delay the work when we actually come to construct it. So it may sound very daunting, but whoever you're working with needs to have this ability and to take programming seriously, because if you don't take it seriously, it can go all very horribly wrong. I think that's enough in detail at this stage. Do you think, Rosie?
Yes, I should think so. Do you want to move on to the next slide, Hannah?
So top tips, I mean, there's just 4, but there are more. So allow a reasonable element of time as a buffer throughout the project. And that is for making decisions. You know, if there are elements to be designed, you as a client and other bodies will require time to review those. You require time for your consultation with secular partners such as English Heritage, Society for Protection of Ancient Buildings, and so on. And they will have views on what it is you're proposing. You need to build time into the programme, if necessary, to respond and amend your proposals, as well as the planning process, ecclesiastical processes, and so on. So there needs to be a degree of float.
That also needs to be time, because things will go wrong. And it's quite simple. Things will always go wrong on projects like this. So if you have a program that's absolutely up to the wire and you don't put any buffer time in at all, you've got no contingency there. So, you know, it's rather like in a budget, you would have contingency. You need to put contingency time in a program so that there's enough wriggle room to rejig when something does go wrong.
Yeah. I mean, I had a project at the cathedral where we did a major project. We had an end date for the internal reordering to be announced that 3 bishops, one of which was an archbishop from abroad, was coming to open the building on the date that we were finishing. So, you know, you don't need that pressure. We made it. Some of the mortar was a little damp, but we did make it. Identify key milestones, and that is absolutely critical. And Rosie's talked about particularly your major funder milestones. For the milestones, the dates from those organisations you need permission from. You will have internal dates, you will have internal committees, you will have trustees, you will have sign-off procedures. They all need to be in the programme, and you need to understand the implications if you don't meet those key milestones. Considering the impact of potential closure on the organisation, that is critical. We, as a practice, we always try and make sure the client can keep going unless it's absolutely unavoidable. So you heard at Newport Minster, we split the project so that the client is only out of the building for the time that the internal reordering is being undertaken. And even then, we can keep them going in the eastern half of the building if they so desire. So all that is critical, because if you can't use the building, it may be your sole asset for generating an income, or the sole asset you've got for delivering whatever your organisation delivers. So if you can't use it, how are you going to continue to operate? Have you then got to find another location from which to operate? And that's all got to be considered. And making sure the programme is checked regularly and updated regularly, and nobody pretends that they're not behind if they are behind. You know, it's if you are behind and you tell people early enough, you can usually sort the problem out and people are forgiving. If you pretend you're on program and then you have a major meeting with a funder or permissions and say, oh, by the way, we're 3 months behind, they're not going to be sympathetic. People prefer you to be honest about where you are. And particularly the lottery, there are mechanisms you can delay slightly. They want to know early. What they want to do is limit risk. They don't want to think that your project is risky and remove that funding. So be honest. I think that's a good line, isn't it, Rosie?
It is, yes.
So those are 4 tips. There are so many other tips that you could have, but they were just 4, bearing in mind we haven't got very long today.
Thank you very much. I think I'm just going to move on to a quick slide on links and resources. This has been a sort of a whistle-stop introduction to what a programme looks like, what's involved, the advice from Rosie and John on the sort of the measures that you need to take to embed into a programme. But there's a lot more that you can do yourself going forward. And there are a few resources here and organisations that I thought I would just signpost you to. So we did talk about the RIBA plan of work, which is the design stages for a project, which all projects will follow. They follow, if you're applying to the lottery, the National Lottery Heritage Fund, they will follow project stages, but all projects will follow design stages. And there is a very useful document called the RIBA Plan of Work online, which shows you the 7 stages of design. If you follow that link, you'll go through and you'll find a PDF which shows a table that was flagged earlier on in the presentation. So I definitely would look that up, and it might help get your head around sort of what's involved design-wise in working through a project programme from that point of view. I would definitely visit the Heritage Trust Network. So this is a membership organisation. They have a toolkit which is actually free for community groups to join. There is, I think, a fee for other organisations. It is a fabulous asset to have. It goes through all the elements of developing and delivering a project with examples and diagrams and ways to contact other organisations and sort of share ideas and exchange feedback. So I would definitely look into the Heritage Trust Network and join them. Just a few funders here. So there are a number of funders out there that can help you get going on a project, and they can help you with getting the professionals on board to start developing your ideas. One is actually the National Lottery Heritage Fund themselves. Whilst they are the big funder and they can fund, millions of pounds worth, they have very small funding pots that can help you get going on sort of projects. So they have a small grants pot. So whilst look at the lottery in general, definitely look at their small grants pot. The Architectural Heritage Fund is one of those few funders that does actually fund viability and development work. They have specific grant programs, so you might not always fit into them, but I would definitely look into them. And they're actually just quite good to get in touch with. And I think they're quite happy to give advice and feedback where they can. For churches, we have, because obviously we've been talking about a church today, there is the National Churches Trust, and they do various grant programs. But again, they do a specific sort of project development grant, which I believe is called their Gateway Grant. Obviously, it is for places of worship. And then just to flag LHBT ourselves. So we are putting this recording and the presentation on our website, but we've also got a number of other resources on there already from various training programs in the past. So please do access that if you can. So we're just going to go on now to a bit of a Q&A.